Did you close the garage? No, I think I left it open. That's it. That's what we forgot. No, that's not it. Kevin! That epic moment when Kate McAllister realizes they've left 8-year-old Kevin behind in Home Alone. And most parents have a version of this story. Ours was our middle daughter, thinking it was hilarious to hide in a huge display of toilet paper for like an eternity of 6 minutes, and which led to a lockdown in the Loblaws at Yonge and York Mills. Earl just read for us a 2,000-year-old version of this parenting nightmare of Mary and Joseph discovering that 12-year-old Jesus has been left behind. Or was he? In Jerusalem, and all the ensuing drama that unfolded. And today we're actually starting a new teaching series, Found by Love. And we're going to work our way through the Gospel of Luke all the way until Easter. And everyone here has made some new decisions in the first few weeks of the year. No sugar, no alcohol, more prayer, more exercise, whatever. So why did we decide for Luke for the new year? And why should you lock in for the next few months? Well, Luke was the first serious historian to write about the most influential person who's ever lived, Jesus of Nazareth. So if you're spiritually curious this afternoon, then Luke is a top-notch source for info so you can investigate for yourself. Luke is one of 4 eyewitness biographies of the life of Jesus, and he records certain events that aren't in any of the other biographies. And Luke has got some specific themes that we're going to touch on over the next couple of months. And here's a few of them. So one theme in the Gospel of Luke is that God consistently upends society's expectations. And I mean, I've certainly got expectations of what I kind of hope my life's going to be like. I've got some hopes. And because of that, I'm curious, maybe a little nervous, to know what God's MO is. So that's a theme in Luke. Another theme in Luke is he's always highlighting the inclusion of the excluded. Luke was writing in a deeply patriarchal society, so it's actually kind of remarkable that 40% of the people named in the Gospel of Luke are women. Children, lepers, the demon-possessed, they're all central to the Gospel of Luke. So what does that mean about who should be central in our lives? Does that have any implications? I don't know, but does it have implications for who we should be platforming, for example? Another theme in the Gospel of Luke is that Luke records how Jesus is the way that God delivers on ancient promises, ancient prophecies, promises that are actually for everyone, not just the original Jewish people that these promises and prophecies were entrusted to. And these are some of the themes that you're going to see as we work our way through the Gospel of Luke. So lock in, because all of us are part of everyone. And Luke is going to not only invite each of us into a personal encounter with Jesus, but Luke is also going to invite us to be part of building a community like this that offers this radical love and acceptance of Jesus to this city. So I'm really looking forward to how Tyler and Nathan and Susie are going to unpack this for you over the next few months. And we're starting off our series today with that story that Earl read, a kind of ancient version of Home Alone. And we're going to see how Jesus both shocks and surprises, and yet you can still trust him with your whole life. Your finances, your work, your dating, all of that you can trust to Jesus. But before we get to that, because we're kicking off our series today, I wanted to spend a few minutes just setting the context for the whole Gospel of Luke. Luke was an educated man, he was a cultured man, he was a well-trained physician, and as I already mentioned, the first real historian to write about Jesus. And this is how he starts his gospel. We didn't hear it today, but it's super important, so I want to make sure we read it. So this is Luke speaking. Many people have undertaken to draw up an orderly account of the events that have been fulfilled in our midst. It's been handed down to us by the original eyewitnesses and stewards of the word. So, most excellent Theophilus, since I traced the course of the whole thing scrupulously from the start, I thought it was a good idea to write down an orderly account for you so that you may have secure knowledge about the matters in which you've been instructed. Like, how do we know how to believe anything, right? In the age of my truth and your truth and AI. Like, I was so disappointed about that viral video of 20 bunnies. Anybody else? Was anybody else convinced it was real for even a second? Okay, thanks, ladies. I really appreciate that. Anyway, I was super disappointed to discover it was AI. Anyway, caring about the accuracy of sources was an issue in the ancient world as well. They weren't like more gullible than we are. That would be historical snobbery. They were just as concerned about truth and accuracy. And so Luke deliberately opens his gospel with this long, formal sentence announcing a couple of things. One, he's telling us that he's personally read the earliest records of Jesus's ministry and life. He's also telling us that he's personally spoken to some of the eyewitnesses himself. And one of those eyewitnesses was surely his mother Mary. Where do all these early stories come from? And maybe most importantly, that Jesus has also spoken, Luke has also spoken to some of the accredited teachers in the local communities. In ancient Palestine, where Luke was writing, obviously in the absence of media, they had official storytellers. Luke calls them stewards of the word. It was there in that first sentence. And what these stewards of the word would do is they would narrate a day or two after a significant event. Maybe there was an earthquake or a battle or a royal visit, and they would narrate the event to the whole community. And of course, they couldn't change anything or modify anything because all the eyewitnesses who'd seen it along with them were all right there in the room. It's like at a family meal. If your grandpa's telling a story and he's totally exaggerating, someone else at the dinner table is going to pipe up and correct grandpa. Right? That's how it worked. So Luke, most scholars date him as writing about 60 or 70 AD. He realizes that the early message of Jesus was super popular. It was spreading like wildfire, and that some of the early stories were getting garbled. And so because he had a wider audience in mind than simply Jewish Palestine, Luke was thinking, how do I connect with educated and inquiring the Roman world? I want to reach those people? Luke decides to write down what we have today as the Gospel of Luke. And the second half of his great work, the book of Acts. Now, most excellent Theophilus, which means lover of God in Greek. Maybe it was a real person, we don't actually know. Could have been a Roman governor, or may have simply been a literary device, a way of addressing anyone who is seriously seeking after God, like you. But the most important thing here is to learn that Luke wrote down his account because he believed these things had actually happened, were historical facts, and that they would change the world, which they did. So we're picking up the Gospel of Luke at the end of chapter 2 because we read chapter 1 at Christmas. This bit that Earl read for us finishes up the birth narrative. We've heard how Jesus and John the Baptist, his cousin, both had miraculous births. The angels have proclaimed the new birth. The shepherds have been afraid. And when the newborn baby is 8 days old, he's circumcised and he's named Jesus. And then his parents, Mary and Joseph, they're observant Jews. So what do? When he's 40 days old, they take Jesus to the temple and they present him to God. And it causes a total commotion because there in the temple is an old man named Simeon and a woman, a prophet, named Anna. And they look at this baby Jesus and they're like, oh my gosh, this is God's global rescue mission. The Messiah is cradled in Mary's arms. All of that, you've been patient, all of that gets us to our passage that we just heard, where Jesus shocks, he surprises, but you can still trust him with your life. So Jesus shocks and surprises. There's just so much in this passage. To start with, it doesn't actually say that Jesus was left behind in Jerusalem a la Home Alone. If you were paying close attention, you will have noticed that it says the boy Jesus stayed behind, implying intent and choice on Jesus' part. And when his parents realized he's been making like no attempts to find his way home, and he seems completely unbothered, they just don't understand. Mary burst out, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." And like, how does Jesus reply? He's got the nerve to rebuke them. "Why did you have to look for me? Isn't it kind of obvious where I would be? I'm in my real Father's house." Whew. That would have been a knife in the heart for Joseph, and probably Mary as well. This is shocking behavior from Jesus for the time and the culture in which he lived. You see, it notes that he was 12 years old. This is important because Jewish boys became men at the age of 12 and went through their bar mitzvah. His father Joseph would have been intensely mentoring Jesus in his 12th year for this really significant rite of passage. Joseph would have been teaching him the scriptures every day. Joseph would have been teaching him how to pray. And when they would have walked around Jerusalem for Passover, Joseph would have had his arm around Jesus, taking him around the city and saying, "Son, look, here's the temple. This is where God's presence dwells. Son, these are our beliefs. These are our hopes." This is what Joseph would have been saying and teaching Jesus. So that when Mary says, "Your father and I have been searching," what Mary's really saying, how could you go and run away in the year that you're meant to be becoming like your father? Remember, this is a deeply traditional society. Young men were meant to grow up to be like their fathers. None of this self-discovery and find your own path that our society so prizes. There was none of that. How could you dishonor Joseph like this? How could you do this to him in public? That's what Mary's saying. "Mom," shoots back Jesus, "I am honoring my father. I had to be in my father's house. I had to be doing my father's business." This is shocking stuff. Not only because in this patriarchal society, Jesus is saying to Joseph, "Sorry, Dad, but my relationship to God relativizes all my family relationships." But notice also that Luke records that when Jesus says this, Mary and Joseph, and they were smart people, Mary and Joseph were told literally didn't understand what he was talking about. And the reason for that is that Jesus was talking about God being his father. So in the Old Testament, there would have been some Jewish leaders like Moses, like the prophet Isaiah, who would sometimes refer to God as father, but it was very rare. It was really infrequent. And it was used to refer to the Creator interacting with the creation. None of this kind of intimate relationship stuff that Jesus is introducing. So Mary and Joseph are like, "What are you talking about?" Like, we have no idea. So Jesus is shocking and surprising the people closest to him, those who love him the most, his earthly parents. And he is blowing the minds of those who don't know him, the religious scholars in the temple in Jerusalem. He's listening to their debates, he's asking questions, he's even answering some of the questions. Like, these scholars, this is like a post-grad seminar with the elite academics at U of T. And they're amazed, Luke writes, amazed at the understanding of this 12-year-old boy. Isn't he the carpenter's son from Nazareth? Which is like Nowheresville. This is the only story of Jesus' childhood recorded in the whole Bible. And he is shocking and surprising everyone he's encountering. I grew up in a Christian home, for which I'm super grateful, but I've been following Jesus for myself for about 30 years now. And one thing I've learned is that you've got to get used to Jesus often being confounding, confusing, He will do things in your life that he does not always explain, especially often at the beginning. He will do things in your life you don't understand, and you will definitely struggle with them. I know I have. I know that's actually not a good advertisement to become a Christian, but hang in there. I just want to be full disclosure. In the famous children's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, young Lucy is expressing her nerves about meeting for the first time the great lion Aslan. And Aslan's clearly the Christ figure in this story. And so Lucy's about to meet the lion, and she nervously asks, "Is he safe?" Mr. Beaver replies, "Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's wild, you know. He's not a tame lion. He's not tame, but he's good." Jesus shocks, Jesus surprises. And if you are new and spiritually curious, do take Alpha. You're going to hear some crazy stuff that Jesus says. Like, love your enemies. I know, it's crazy, right? Love your enemies. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. Be perfect like your heavenly Father's perfect. Get this, forgive 70 times 7. And wait till you hear him talk about money. It's nothing like what financial planners are going to tell you. But he's good. And you can trust him with your whole life. One of the funniest parts of this passage for me is how after he's had this shocking encounter with his parents, Luke records that he heads home to Nazareth with them, and he's obedient to his parents. And we don't know precisely how conscious Jesus was at the age of 12 of being the Messiah. We have got no way of knowing that. But Jesus clearly knows that God is in some unique way his Father. "I will obey you, but I don't have to," is what Jesus is saying to Mary and Joseph, "because I'm older than you." The one child in all of history who can say that to their parents. Jesus, created at the foundation of the world. He's here submitting to the people that he's shocked. He's committing himself to his earthly parents. That's why we can trust him, because Jesus, the King of the universe, is willing to submit to earthly powers for the sake of love. We're told that young Jesus was missing how many days in the temple? 3. The day it took for Mary and Joseph to realize he was lost, a day for them to walk back to Jerusalem, then a day for them to find him. And as a parent, I can guarantee you that the question of whether Jesus was dead or alive absolutely crossed his parents' mind in that agonizing 72 hours. Absolutely. 21 years later, Jesus submitted to earthly powers, allowing himself to be arrested by the Romans, judged by the religious leaders, and crucified. 21 years later, he submitted to his heavenly Father, and he died for 3 days, absorbing all the sin and suffering of the world. And then he was raised to new life, dying the death that we should die, so that we have a chance of living the life of love that he lived. And on some level, as he was being walked around Jerusalem and mentored by Joseph, 12-year-old Jesus knew that one day he would walk on those same stones, but he'd be carrying a cross. On some level, Jesus knew that he was going to make that temple in Jerusalem obsolete. He was going to be the sacrifice that meant there was no more need for temple sacrifice. And at some level, when Jesus ate the lamb at that Passover meal with his mom and dad, he knew that one day he was going to be that lamb. And he knew that he was going to be the answer to every real question that any of us, myself included, could ever have. He knew that. What's the purpose of my life? How do I use my money? How do I date? How do I find God, get forgiven, hold on to hope? Any real question you've got, Jesus knew he'd be the answer for us. And so he went home and he submitted to his parents. He's surprising. He's shocking, but he's good. He went to hell and back for you and me, so we can trust him with our lives. This encounter that Luke records for us today, it's about growing up. But it's not about Jesus growing up. It's about Mary and Joseph. Kids have a way of doing that to their parents, which is what Jesus' rebuke to Mary does. She has put herself and Joseph at the center of their teenager's life, and Jesus says, no. The Father's the center of my world. And Jesus asks Mary and Joseph and us to do likewise and to grow up. Let me quickly end with two practical applications of this. There's lots of others. But if you're already a follower of Jesus this afternoon, I want us to notice that it was the people who loved him the most, his parents, who couldn't find Jesus. Don't just assume that Jesus is cheering on everything in your life. You may have left him behind with some decisions you've taken, big or small. So ask him in prayer daily to guide you. Don't make any serious decisions without extensive prayer and conversation with other followers of Jesus. So together you can ask, is Jesus with me in this? It's like super important. We can leave him behind by our daily decisions. Be intentional about growing in your spiritual life. Serve on Alpha. Join a community here at St. George's. Be encouraged by other people learning to center God in their lives. And if you're spiritually curious, I'm so excited for you, because everybody who earnestly seeks God will find God, either in this life, I promise you, in the life to come. Be persistent in your searching and your questioning. Mary and Joseph were, and as we heard, there were some painful shocks and surprises for those two on that journey. But we're told at the end that Mary treasured all these things in her heart. Each new thing you are learning about God. Maybe today's the first time you're hearing that God actually loves you or that God has a plan for you. Every new thing you learn about God, treasure it. Treasure it in your heart. And you will grow in God, and God will grow in you. I guarantee it. He's not tame, but he is good. Thanks be to God. Amen.